Hello, CTO Minutes. Welcome back to the channel. It's been some time since I've uploaded a long talk video, and today I want to address the topic of HDR, hydrodynamic recanalization. For those of you who haven't been touched by this fever that's going around in the CTO community, this was started by a paper by Carlino in November 2024, published in CCI. He reported 43 patients with 45 CTOs that were recanalized with a modified Carlino technique known as hydrodynamic recanalization. This basically is a smaller amount of contrast, the 0.5 mils, as opposed to the sort of 4-5 mils that was used for traditional Carlino, and is done after puncture into the proximal cap and pushing the microcatheter slightly into the proximal cap, and done with screening so that the contrast will go out into the distal true lumen, the side branch, or stain the plaque, or a combination of these things that will then allow a hydrophilic wire, such as an XT type of wire, to wire into distal true lumen. Now, in this case series, we need to note it's a retrospective case series, so all the cases are retrospective. So there's a lot of case selection here. Now, the complexity is moderate, it's 2-point-something JCTO score, so it's not the easiest of CTOs, and they use up to 2 to 4 wires to wire through. So they are not the simplest of CTOs. Now, the big question, the question that we always are concerned about in the CTO Demon channel, and of course in the AP CTO Club, is this safe? Is this safe? Now, going back a bit of history for the younger people on the line reading the channel, in 2008, Carlino first proposed this technique of injecting contrast selectively through a microcatheter inside the CTO body. The initial technique was a technique to really achieve star. You injected huge amount of contrast, 4 to 5 mils, in the distal vessel, hoping to make dissection and fenestration in the distal vessel. Now, we know the results of this isn't very good in terms of long term. And so even Carlino himself admit that this technique is not what it should be. And Carlino has been hard working into modifying this technique for different use. And this is the sort of latest modification of the Carlino technique. Now, in the article, there is this description, a beautiful picture of where the contrast could go. Type 1 is that you get this stain in the proximal plaque. Okay, it doesn't go anywhere. Type 2A is the perfect idea, is that it goes into the distal true lumen. Type 2B, it goes into a side branch. Type 3 is some sort of combination of it going into the distal lumen or side branch. Now, this may seem very logical to many of you, but if I were to ask you to draw a similar diagram for wire position, what would you think it will look like? Well, immediately some of you will say, well, we're missing type 4 and type 5, of course. Everybody knows, yes, when you wire, the wire can get stuck in the plaque, type 1. It can go into the distal true lumen, type 2A. It can go into a side branch, type 2B. It could go both in side branch and main lumen, alternatively, type 3. But it can also go subintimal, type 4. And it can go extravascular, extra architecture, type 5. Everybody knows this. So the CTO community is not stupid. We're not going to be fooled by a diagram to think the contrast couldn't go subintimal or go outside the vessel. That simply isn't true. But it's interesting to note that in the paper, we don't have type 4 and type 5 described to me. I mean, to fully describe the picture, you should have type 4A, which is hematoma extending down the distal vessel, type 4B, hematoma extending down the side branch, and type 4C, hematoma extending back up to the aorta, causing type A dissection. And type 5, maybe type 5A into pericardium, type 5B into pericoronary vessel tissue that causes staining, and type 5C into a chamber, the LV, RV, or something like that. That will be a full description. Now, the question is, what is our level of tolerance of safety? Now, in the paper, Carlino says the small amount of contrast, the point reduction from sort of 4 mils down to 0.5 mils, means that this is safe. But a quick calculation must convince us that this is not safe. The fluid volume that fills a cylindrical tube is expressed by the mathematical formula pi r square h. R is the radius of the tube and h is the length. So 0.5 mils in a 3O vessel with a radius of 1.5 The H, how long is the H if you calculate it? It's about 70 millimeters. In other words, in a 3O vessel, if you injected 0.5 mils and it all went into the subintimal space, you'll create a 70 millimeter long subintimal hematoma that occupies the entire vessel. It's a lot of contrast, actually, 0.5 mils in terms of vessel length. The problem also is that the first 0.215 mils is unseen because that's not filled with contrast. That's filled with blood that's inside the lumen of the Corsair microcatheter. And you can't see that. So even if you stop as soon as you see contrast coming out, it's too late because the first 0.2 mils has already created almost 35 millimeters of subintimal space in the 3O vessel. So I have no doubt the mathematics tells me that 0.5 mils of contrast cannot be absolutely safe because 0.5 mils can cause a huge perforation and cause a huge subintimal space. It's been safe in these 43 patients that were very carefully selected. But if we apply it to larger groups of patients, we know it's not going to be safe. The other problem with HDR is that it's unpredictable. I can control where a wire goes, but I cannot control where contrast goes. So the question I have for the community about CTO DMNS is, what is our tolerance of the safety level? And is 0.5 mils enough for us to tolerate the safety? One thing we got to bear in mind is that a hole that's made by contrast is a much bigger hole that's made than a hole that's made by a 0.014 inch wire. A hole that's made by a 0.014 inch wire, we are very familiar with because, to be honest, me included, we've wired outside the vessel architecture before. And most of you have, I'm sure. And most of the time it's safe because the hole is 0.014. But the hole that's made by contrast is not 0.014. It's very unpredictable. And most of the time it's going to be bigger than 0.014, which means it's more dangerous to exit a vessel with contrast than with a wire. Well, we need a much bigger series of patients, and Carlino agrees with this. We need a much bigger series of patients and preferably prospectively enroll patients and preferably comparing to a wire-based strategy to really know whether this is safe. To establish this is safe just because you reduce the amount of contrast when the mathematics tells you this contrast volume is in fact very big volume inside a vessel, is just not very logical to me. I would like to see a well-conducted, adequately powered, randomized controlled trial between wire-based and HDR before I'm prepared to use HDR to every case. We need an all-comers randomized controlled trial. Of course, case selection is very important. And I think if we are not going to conduct an all-comers randomized controlled trial, we then need to start specifying and thinking about which are the patients that are going to work with HDR. HDR is going to work better than wires. And of course, we always remember in safety, we're comparing this technique, this new technique, with wire-based therapy. Is it safer than wire? The question is not whether it's safe, is it safer than wire-based? And that's the kind of topic I want to pick up in the next video. So I hope I put some thoughts in your mind about this whole concept of HDR, and I hope this can begin some sort of dialogue, especially within the APCO group, so that we can formulate some sort of response to this seemingly crazy fashion of HDR at the moment. Well, I've tried some in the cases in HDR too, I have to admit, and but I hope as you try cases, you think about it more logically, more sensibly, mathematically, scientifically, so that we don't harm our patients when we do their CTOs. Bye for now, my demonettes. See you next time.